Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into something pretty significant happening in the tech world.
Yeah, it's about Apple and how they seem to be really speeding up the shift of iPhone production over to India.
Specifically for the U.S. market, right?
Yeah.
That's the angle we're focusing on. We want to unpack why this is happening, what it means for Apple, for India.
And probably most importantly, what it might mean for you listening.
Exactly. So to do this, we've gone through quite a few reports. We're talking the Economic Times, the FT.
And some local Indian analysis from Inks 42, even checking the buzz on stock twits to see what investors are thinking. Financial modeling prep, too. It gives a rounded view.
Our mission really is to pull out the key insights from all this, help you understand what's going on without getting lost in all the details.
Let's get straight to it then.
All right. So what's the main catalyst here? What's really pushing Apple to make such a big change to where they build their phones?
It seems like the biggest factors are those U.S. tariffs, first and foremost, and just the general geopolitical climate,
The tariffs. The ones with the Trump administration.
Yeah, those reciprocal tariffs on Chinese goods. They've been a constant cost pressure for companies like Apple that manufacture a lot in China.
Right.
Even though some electronics got temporary breaks, there's still that looming 20% levy on Chinese imports generally. That definitely impacts the bottom line.
Okay, so China's facing these tariffs. But wasn't India also in the mix with U.S. tariffs at some point? I seem to remember reading something about that.
You did. That's a really important nuance here. India was facing a 26% reciprocal tariff from the U.S.
Okay.
Now, that was less severe than I think it was 54% cited for China at one point, but still significant. The key thing now, though, is that the tariff on India is actually suspended right now.
Suspended? Why?
Because the U.S. and India are trying to hammer out a bilateral trade agreement. So suspending that tariff, well, it probably makes India look even more appealing for Apple right now.
I see. So it's kind of a moving target with these tariffs. And there's this threat of potentially even higher tariffs, especially on things packed with semiconductors.
Exactly. And semiconductors are in, pretty much everything Apple makes, not just iPhones. So higher tariffs there could really ripple through their whole product range.
And Apple ships a lot of iPhones to the U.S., don't they?
Oh, huge volumes. The projection for this financial year is something like $8 to $9 billion worth.
Wow.
And historically, those shipments came in duty-free. So any new tariff is a direct hit, either on Apple's profits or potentially on the price you end up paying.
Right. That makes sense. We even saw that massive dip in Apple's market value early last year, didn't we? $700 billion wiped off.
Yeah, $700 billion. And a lot of that anxiety was reportedly tied to these tariff concerns. It just shows how sensitive the market is to this stuff.
It really puts the financial stakes into perspective. So tariffs are a huge driver, but I guess the pandemic must have played a role too, thinking about supply chains.
Absolutely. You hit it. The COVID disruptions in China were let's say, a major wake-up call.
Right.
It highlighted the risks of having all your eggs in one manufacturing basket. So building resilience, diversifying where you produce things, that became a huge strategic priority. Less risk from future shocks, whether it's another pandemic or, political instability.
Okay, so that leads us right into Apple's big move, looking seriously at India. And the reports suggest their plans are, pretty ambitious.
Very ambitious. The Financial Times reported Apple's aiming to shift all U.S.-bound iPhone assembly to India.
All of it?
All of it, and possibly as soon as next year, so by the end of 2026.
Got incredibly fast. What kind of numbers are we talking about?
The goal mentioned is producing over 60 million iPhones a year in India, just for the U.S. market.
60 million. That sounds like a massive increase from where they are now. What's their current Indian output?
Well, as of early April this year, estimates were around, say, 10 to 15% of their global iPhone assembly happening in India.
Really?
Earlier projections were targeting maybe 25% by the end of 2025. Some analysts even thought maybe 25% this year. So jumping to 60 million just for the U.S., that's basically doubling India's total current iPhone output. It's a huge leap.
Wow. And presumably their big partners like Foxconn are heavily involved in making this happen.
Oh, definitely. Foxconn is scaling up big time in India. They're aiming to make somewhere between 25 and 30 million iPhones there this year alone.
Which is way up from last year, right?
More than double. They made around 12 million last year. And they're building this huge new facility near Bengaluru, 300 acres. It's set to be their second biggest site globally, only smaller than their main China operations.
So they're really digging in for the long term, it seems.
Looks that way. A serious commitment.
Well, but hold on. Are these phones being like 100% made in India yet, or is it more assembly?
Good question. It's still largely assembly. So companies like Tata Electronics and Foxconn, they're actually importing kits, sets of pre-assembled components, mainly from China. And then they do the final assembly in India. It shows that while assembly is booming, that whole complex web of component suppliers isn't fully established in India yet.
Got it.
Though interestingly, Apple was reportedly already flying plane loads of iPhones from India to the US back before those March tariff hikes were expected. So they're already using that Indian capacity for the US market.
So India is becoming way more important for Apple. But what's in it for India itself? What are their goals here?
India's definitely looking to capitalize. I mean, first off, India has become Apple's fourth biggest market globally.
Really?
Yeah, with something like 35% growth reported back in February. And late last year, Apple actually cracked the top 5 smartphone brands in India for the first time ever, grabbing about 10% market share in Q4.
That's pretty impressive growth.
It is. So having a strong domestic market probably makes India an even more attractive place for Apple to manufacture.
And the Indian government must be pushing this too, trying to become a bigger manufacturing player.
Absolutely. There's a huge government push to make India a global manufacturing hub. Plus, they're actively working on that trade deal with the U.S. we mentioned.
Right.
And they've rolled out incentives. There's this production-linked incentive scheme, the PLI scheme.
PLA. What's that, basically?
It essentially gives financial rewards to companies, including Apple's partners, for boosting their local production.
Mm-hmm.
They've allocated quite a bit of money to it for smartphone makers.
Okay, so real incentives.
Yeah, and it seems to be working. India is already the world's second largest mobile phone producer now. And beyond assembly, they've got ambitions for semiconductors, too, with government money going into the India semiconductor mission.
So lots of ambition from India's side. But it can't all be smooth sailing, right?
Yeah.
What are the challenges or potential roadblocks for Apple's big India plan?
No, definitely not smooth sailing. There are some major hurdles, like we touched on, even with more assembly in India, most of the really critical high-tech components.
The chips, the cameras, the fancy screens.
Exactly. Those still mostly come from China or the US or South Korea. So the idea of a 100% made in India iPhone, that's still kind of a pipe dream for the moment.
Why that? Just lack of local suppliers?
Pretty much. They just don't have that mature, deep ecosystem for all those specialized components yet. Building that takes a lot of time and, well, a lot of investment.
Makes sense. What other kinds of challenges are we talking about?
Well, things like infrastructure bottlenecks can be an issue. Sometimes labor efficiency questions come up. Mm-hmm. And navigating the regulatory environment in India can be complex, too. These things might slow down the pace of Apple's shift. In fact, some analysts are a bit cautious. They reckon Apple's actual iPhone production in India might stay in the single-digit percentages of global output by the end of 2025.
So maybe falling short of that 25% target we heard about earlier.
Potentially, yeah. It highlights the difference between ambitious goals and on-the-ground reality sometimes.
Okay, so challenges for Apple. What about for us? For consumers, especially in the U.S., what could this all mean?
Well, the elephant in the room is potentially higher prices for iPhones.
Oh, how much higher?
One group of analysts, Rosenblatt Securities, put out an estimate. They thought a high-end model, like maybe the upcoming iPhone 16 Pro Max, could potentially hit $2,300.
$2,300?
Wow. Yeah, if Apple decides to pass on all the extra costs from tariffs or shifting supply chains directly to the consumer.
That's a lot for a phone.
It is. And remember, the U.S. market is huge for Apple, about 28% of their global iPhone sales. So any significant price jump there would definitely be felt.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
And I guess just meeting all U.S. demand from India, that would require a colossal expansion of their capacity there, wouldn't it?
A massive, rapid expansion. Doubling current output, like we discussed, is a huge task. Plus, there are these reports suggesting that even the Chinese component makers are finding it tricky to set up shop in India.
Why is that?
Geopolitics, mainly. Tensions between India and China, government approval slowing things down. It just adds another layer of complexity to building that local supply chain.
It really is a tangled situation. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. How are the markets reacting? What are investors thinking about all this?
It's interesting. Some reports, like from StockTwits, suggest that retail investor sentiment towards Apple stock actually turned more bullish, more positive after this news about the big India shift really started circulating.
Huh. So investors see this as a good move, despite the challenges.
It seems the initial take is that it's a strategically sound move.
Yeah.
probably because it helps Apple, reduce its risks, the tariff risks, the risk of being too reliant on China. Diversification is generally seen as a positive.
Okay, so maybe the market thinks the benefits of dodging tariffs and diversifying outweigh the costs and complexities, at least for now.
That seems to be the initial feeling, but you can bet investors will be watching Apple's upcoming earnings reports like hawks.
Looking for concrete numbers?
Exactly. Any hints about the real financial impact of the tariffs? How much the India shift is actually costing or saving them? How fast it's really happening? Tracking Apple's production numbers? Watching for any new trade war developments? Monitoring India's progress? Those will be the key things for investors going forward.
Right. So let's try to wrap this up. It feels like Apple is definitely making a strategic pivot, moving more U.S.-bound iPhone making to India. The big drivers seem to be those U.S. tariffs on China and just wanting a safer, more spread out supply chain.
Yeah, that's the core of it.
And while India is stepping up fast as a manufacturing location for Apple, building that complete local ecosystem for all the parts, that's still a major work in progress.
Absolutely. Big challenges remain there.
And this whole shift could potentially mean higher iPhone prices for consumers down the line. And it's definitely shaking up the global tech manufacturing map.
That sums it up pretty well. It's a complex situation with a lot of moving parts, and it really leaves us with a big question for you, the listener, to think about. As Apple gets more deeply involved with India, what does that really signal for the future, for the global balance of tech manufacturing? And what does it mean for the relationships between the big players, the U.S., China, India?
Yeah. And maybe the most direct question.
Will it ultimately be you, the consumer, who picks up the tab for these big geopolitical chess moves in the tech world?